A single mother watched helplessly as school bullies terrorized her son while teachers and administrators looked the other way. When official channels failed and the violence escalated, she made a desperate call that would change everything.
This is Hammer and Tails. Let's get started.
Michelle Torres knew something was wrong the moment Danny walked through the front door. Her 12-year-old son's backpack hung from one shoulder instead of both. His shirt was untucked, and he was walking with the careful movements of someone trying not to show pain. "How was school, mijo?" Michelle asked from the kitchen where she was preparing dinner after her shift at the medical billing office. "Fine," Danny mumbled, heading straight for his room. "Danny, wait." Michelle dried her hands on a dish towel and followed him. "Look at me." When Danny turned around, Michelle saw what he'd been trying to hide. A purple bruise was forming under his left eye and his lower lip was split. "What happened to your face?" "I fell." "You fell and gave yourself a black eye?" Danny's shoulders sagged. At 12, he was small for his age, with his father's gentle nature and his mother's stubborn streak. Right now, he looked like he was carrying the weight of the world. "It's nothing, Mom. Just leave it alone." Michelle knelt down to his eye level. "Danny, if someone hurt you, I need to know about it." "You can't do anything about it anyway," Danny said, and the defeat in his voice broke Michelle's heart. "Try me." Danny hesitated, then the whole story came tumbling out. Brad Henley and his friends had cornered Danny in the bathroom after lunch. They'd taken his lunch money again, and when Danny tried to resist, Brad had shoved him into the wall. "This has been going on for weeks?" Michelle asked, anger building in her chest. "They said if I told anyone, they'd make it worse." Michelle pulled Danny into a hug, feeling him tremble against her. Her son, who used to bound through the front door full of stories about his day, had been living in fear while she was completely unaware. "This stops tomorrow," Michelle said. "I'm calling the school first thing in the morning." "Mom, please don't. It'll just make everything worse." "Worse than getting beaten up in the bathroom." Danny pulled away from her. "You don't understand. Brad's dad is important. The school won't do anything." Michelle had heard of Robert Henley. He owned several businesses in town and was always in the local newspaper for some charity event or community project. But that didn't give his son the right to terrorize other kids. "We'll see about that." What Michelle didn't realize was that Danny was absolutely right about the school, and her attempts to protect her son were about to run into a wall of indifference and corruption that would force her to make choices she never imagined. The next morning, Michelle called Riverside Elementary and requested a meeting with Principal Crawford. She was told he could see her at 4 p.m. after school hours. Michelle arranged to leave work early and arrived at the school carrying a folder with photos of Danny's injuries and a written timeline of the bullying incidents her son had finally admitted to. Principal Crawford was a thin man in his 50s who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. His office was filled with awards and photos of him with various local politicians and business leaders. "Mrs. Torres, please have a seat. What can I do for you?" "I'm here about the bullying my son Danny has been experiencing." Crawford's expression immediately became guarded. "Bullying is a serious accusation. Can you be more specific?" Michelle opened her folder and showed him the photos of Danny's bruises. "This happened yesterday. A group of older kids led by Brad Henley have been physically assaulting my son and extorting money from him." Crawford barely glanced at the photos. "Boys will be boys, Mrs. Torres. Sometimes kids have disagreements." "This isn't a disagreement. This is assault." "That's a very strong word. Have you considered that perhaps Danny misunderstood the situation? Sometimes when children are having social difficulties, they can misinterpret normal playground interactions." Michelle felt her temper rising. "Are you suggesting my son is lying about being beaten up?" "I'm suggesting that children often exaggerate conflicts. Perhaps if Danny learned to stand up for himself better, he wouldn't have these problems." "He's 12 years old and half the size of these kids. What exactly is he supposed to do?" Crawford leaned back in his chair. Mrs. Torres, I've known the Henley family for years. Brad is a good kid from a good family. His father is very involved in our school community. And that gives Brad the right to assault other students? I didn't say that. But I think you're blowing this out of proportion. Michelle pulled out her timeline. This has been going on for 6 weeks. Every incident I've documented here with dates and details. Crawford didn't even look at the papers. I'll have a word with the boys involved. Sometimes a simple conversation can clear up these misunderstandings. What about consequences for Brad and his friends? Mrs. Torres, we handle discipline issues internally. I can assure you that appropriate action will be taken. Michelle left the meeting feeling frustrated but hopeful that adult intervention would solve the problem. She was wrong. 2 days later, Danny came home with a bruised rib and a torn shirt. What happened to the principal talking to Brad? He did, Danny said miserably. Brad told him I started the fight by calling him names. Mr. Crawford believed him. Did you call him names? I told him to leave me alone, that's it. Michelle called the school again, demanding another meeting. This time, Crawford was less accommodating. Mrs. Torres, I spoke with all the boys involved. There are conflicting stories about what happened. Without witnesses or clear evidence, it's difficult to determine who's telling the truth. My son has physical injuries, Brad doesn't. That could be consistent with Danny being the aggressor and Brad defending himself. Michelle stared at the principal in disbelief. You think my 90-pound son attacked a kid who's 6 inches taller and 40 pounds heavier? I think children sometimes make poor choices when they're upset. I want Brad Henley suspended pending a full investigation. Crawford's expression hardened. Mrs. Torres, I understand you're concerned about your son, but I won't have parents coming into my office making demands about disciplinary actions. We know how to handle these situations. Clearly you don't. Perhaps you should consider whether Riverside Elementary is the right fit for Danny. Sometimes a change of environment can help children who are having social adjustment issues. Michelle left the second meeting knowing that the school had no intention of protecting her son. Worse, they were essentially blaming Danny for his own victimization. But Michelle had no idea that the situation was about to get much worse before she found an unexpected solution. That weekend, Michelle's brother Carlos stopped by for his usual Sunday dinner. Carlos was 2 years older than Michelle and worked as a mechanic at Rodriguez Auto Repair. He'd helped raise Danny after Michelle's divorce and was one of the few stable male figures in the boy's life. "Where's Danny?" Carlos asked, looking around the small apartment. "In his room. He doesn't want to come out much anymore." "What's going on?" Michelle told Carlos the whole story, from the bullying to the school's complete failure to address it. Carlos listened with growing anger. "Have you called the police?" "I tried. They said it was a school matter and referred me back to the principal." "What about the school board?" "I called them too. They said they had full confidence in Principal Crawford's ability to handle discipline issues." Carlos was quiet for a moment. "You know what this is really about, right?" "What do you mean?" "Robert Henley donated the money for the new computer lab. His company sponsors the school's reading program. He's got Crawford in his pocket." Michelle had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made her feel even more helpless. "So what am I supposed to do? Let them keep beating up my son?" "Maybe it's time to think outside the box." "What do you mean?" Carlos hesitated. "I know some people who don't like bullies. People who understand what it means to protect kids." "What kind of people?" "The kind who ride motorcycles and look out for each other's families." Michelle had seen some of Carlos's customers at the shop. Men with leather vests and intimidating appearances who came to have their bikes serviced. She'd always assumed they were dangerous. "Carlos, I can't ask criminals to." "They're not criminals, Michelle. They're mechanics and construction workers and veterans. They just happen to ride motorcycles and look scary to people who don't know them." "I don't know about this." "Look, I'm not saying you should do anything. I'm just saying that sometimes the people everyone's afraid of are the ones who actually stand up for what's right." Monday morning brought the worst incident yet. Danny didn't come home until almost 5 p.m., 2 hours after school ended. When he finally walked through the door, his clothes were dirty and he was limping. "Where have you been?" "I hid in the library until I was sure they were gone." "What happened today?" Danny's voice was barely a whisper. "They said they're going to beat me up worse tomorrow." Brad said his dad told Principal Crawford to keep his mouth shut about our disagreements. Michelle felt something snap inside her. The bullies weren't just hurting her son physically, they were terrorizing him psychologically, and they were bragging about their protection from authority figures. That night after Danny went to bed, Michelle called Carlos. "I need that number." "You sure about this?" "I'm sure that I've tried everything else and my son is being tortured while adults who are supposed to protect him look the other way." "His name is Frank. Frank Russo. Everyone calls him Razor." Michelle almost changed her mind 3 times before dialing the number Carlos had given her. When a gravelly voice answered, she nearly hung up. "Frank Russo." "Mr. Russo, my name is Michelle Torres. My brother Carlos Rodriguez gave me your number." "Carlos is good people. What can I do for you?" Michelle took a deep breath and told him everything. About Danny, about Brad Henley, about the school's refusal to act. Frank listened without interrupting. "How old is your boy?" 12. "And this Henley kid?" 14, and bigger." Frank was quiet for a moment. "Lady, I got kids too, and I got a real problem with anyone who hurts children. I don't want anyone to get in trouble. I just want it to stop." "It'll stop. You got my word on that. What are you going to do?" "Nothing illegal, nothing violent. We're just going to make sure everyone at that school understands that someone's watching out for your boy." Michelle hung up the phone, wondering if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. What she didn't know was that her desperate call was about to trigger a chain of events that would expose the truth about both the bullies and the bikers in ways no one expected. Tuesday morning, Danny was getting ready for school with his usual reluctance when Michelle heard the rumble of motorcycle engines outside their apartment complex. She looked out the window and saw 5 motorcycles parked in the visitor spaces. The riders were exactly what she'd expected. Large men in leather vests with patches and insignia she didn't understand. They looked like every stereotype of dangerous bikers she'd ever seen in movies. Danny joined her at the window. "Mom, who are those guys?" "Friends of Uncle Carlos." "Why are they here?" Michelle wasn't sure how to explain. "They're going to make sure you're safe at school." Danny's eyes widened. "You called bikers to protect me?" "I called people who care about kids being hurt by bullies." One of the bikers, a tall man with graying hair and multiple tattoos, approached their door and knocked gently. "Mrs. Torres, I'm Frank. We spoke last night." Up close, Frank was less intimidating than Michelle had expected. His eyes were kind, and he spoke with the careful politeness of someone who knew his appearance could be frightening. "Thank you for coming. This must be Danny." Frank knelt down to the boy's eye level. "Your mom told me you've been having some trouble at school." Danny nodded shyly. "Well, Danny, I want you to know that some friends and I are going to make sure that trouble stops. We're not going to hurt anyone or do anything wrong. We're just going to be around to make sure you're safe." "Are you really bikers?" Frank smiled. "Yeah, we ride motorcycles. But we're also dads and uncles and guys who remember what it was like to be 12 years old." Michelle watched this interaction with amazement. The scary biker leader was treating her son with more respect and kindness than Principal Crawford had shown. "Are you ready to go to school?" Frank asked Danny. "I guess. Tell you what, why don't you walk to school like normal, and we'll just happen to be riding in the same direction." The ride to school was unlike anything Danny had ever experienced. 5 motorcycles provided an escort that made him feel safer than he'd felt in weeks. When they arrived at Riverside Elementary, other kids and parents stared in amazement at the impressive convoy. Frank and his friends parked across the street from the school and simply stood by their bikes, talking quietly among themselves. They weren't threatening or aggressive, they were just very visibly present. Danny walked into school with his head held higher than it had been in months. The biker's presence didn't go unnoticed. Within an hour, Principal Crawford was on the phone with Michelle. "Mrs. Torres, there are several motorcycle riders outside our school. Do you know anything about this? They're making sure my son gets to school safely. This is completely inappropriate. You can't have gang members intimidating students and staff. They're not gang members, and they're not intimidating anyone. They're standing on a public street. I want them gone. I want my son protected from bullies. When you do your job, they'll do theirs." Crawford hung up without another word, but the biker's strategy was working. Brad Henley and his friends saw the motorcycles when they arrived at school, and word spread quickly through the student body. The kids who'd been terrorizing Danny suddenly found themselves wondering who the scary-looking men were and why they were there. For the first time in weeks, Danny made it through an entire school day without being hurt, threatened, or having his money stolen. Frank was waiting across the street when school ended. "How was your day, Danny?" "Good, really good. Nobody bothered me at all." "Glad to hear it." That evening, Michelle got a call she wasn't expecting. "Mrs. Torres, this is Robert Henley. I think we need to talk." Michelle had never spoken to Brad's father, but she recognized the voice of someone accustomed to getting his way. "About what, Mr. Henley?" "About the motorcycle gang you've brought to intimidate children at my son's school. First, they're not a gang. Second, they're not intimidating children. They're protecting my son from your son. Mrs. Torres, I don't know what lies your boy has been telling you, but Brad would never hurt another child. I have photos of the bruises your son gave my child. Children get bruises playing. It doesn't mean anything." Michelle felt her anger rising. "Your son has been terrorizing my child for weeks, and you know it. I know that my son is being targeted by false accusations from a family that's now brought criminals to threaten him. The only criminal behavior I've seen is your son assaulting other students while you use your influence to cover it up." Robert's voice became cold. "Mrs. Torres, I strongly suggest you call off your biker friends and find another school for your son. Riverside Elementary has no place for disruptive influences." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm giving you friendly advice. Remove those bikers or I'll have to take steps to protect my child and other students from the dangerous element you've introduced." Michelle hung up, but she had a feeling the conversation was far from over. What she didn't know was that Robert Henley was about to make a mistake that would expose the truth about who the real threats were. The bikers continued their protective presence for the rest of the week. They never approached the school property, never spoke to students, and never did anything more threatening than stand by their motorcycles and talk among themselves. But their presence had a dramatic effect. Danny's confidence returned. Other kids who'd been quietly victimized by Brad's group began speaking up. Parents who'd been afraid to complain about bullying started calling the school. Principal Crawford was getting pressure from multiple directions, but he seemed more concerned about the bikers than the bullying. Friday afternoon, Robert Henley decided to take direct action. Michelle was at work when Carlos called her. "You need to get down to the school, now." "What's wrong?" Robert Henley showed up with some kind of security guys and confronted Frank and the others. "It's getting tense." Michelle left work immediately and drove to Riverside Elementary. When she arrived, she found a crowd gathered across the street from the school. Robert Henley stood with two men in suits who looked like private security. Frank and 4 other bikers faced them, hands at their sides, clearly trying to de-escalate the situation. "This ends now," Robert was saying as Michelle approached. "You people have no business around this school." "We're standing on a public sidewalk," Frank replied calmly, "not breaking any laws. You're intimidating children and staff with your presence. We're making sure children don't get hurt by bullies." Robert's face reddened. "My son is not a bully, and I won't have gang members threatening him. We've never threatened anyone. Your very presence is a threat." Michelle stepped forward. "Mr. Henley, these men are here because your son has been assaulting my child and the school refuses to stop it." Your son is a liar and a troublemaker. Frank's voice remained steady, but Michelle noticed the other bikers shifting slightly. Sir, you need to be careful how you talk about children. Don't tell me how to talk. I know who you people are. I know what you represent. Do you? Frank asked. Because I'm a combat veteran who served 3 tours in Afghanistan. Tommy here teaches 2nd grade at Jefferson Elementary. Marcus owns a construction company and coaches Little League. Robert looked taken aback by this information, but he pressed on. I don't care what you claim to be. You're criminals trying to intimidate law-abiding citizens. The only criminal activity I've seen, Frank said, is your son beating up smaller kids while you use your money and influence to cover it up. How dare you? I dare because I've got kids of my own, and I know the difference between protecting children and enabling bullies. The crowd had grown larger, and Michelle noticed that many of the faces belonged to parents and school staff. They were hearing things about both the bikers and the Henley family that surprised them. Robert pulled out his phone. I'm calling the police. These criminals are threatening my family. Please do, Frank said. Ask for Officer Martinez. He knows me pretty well. 20 minutes later, 2 police cars arrived. Michelle recognized Officer Martinez from community events. He approached the group with the weary expression of someone who'd dealt with Robert Henley before. What's the problem here? Robert stepped forward. These gang members are threatening students and families at this school. Officer Martinez looked at Frank and smiled slightly. Hey, Frank, how's Lisa doing with her math homework? Better, thanks. Your tutoring really helped. Robert looked confused. You know this criminal? Criminal? Officer Martinez laughed. Frank Russo is one of the most respected members of our community. He volunteers with at-risk kids, organizes charity rides for veterans, and his daughter is in my nephew's class. But he's in a motorcycle gang. He's a member of a motorcycle club that does more community service than most church groups. Frank handed Officer Martinez a folder. These are photos of injuries to Danny Torres, along with documentation of the school's refusal to address the bullying. Officer Martinez looked through the papers, his expression growing serious. Mr. Henley, is your son involved in this? My son is being falsely accused by troublemakers. These photos show serious injuries to a 12-year-old child. Children get hurt playing. Not like this. Officer Martinez closed the folder. Mr. Henley, I suggest you have a serious conversation with your son about his behavior. I suggest you arrest these criminals for harassment. On what grounds? They're standing on a public sidewalk, not breaking any laws. Robert's security guards looked uncomfortable. They'd been hired to intimidate bikers, but the situation had turned into something entirely different. Principal Crawford appeared, having finally decided to address the situation personally. Officer Martinez, we need these men removed from school property. They're not on school property, Mr. Crawford. They're on public property, exercising their right to peaceful assembly. But they're intimidating our students. A voice from the crowd called out. The only people intimidating students are the bullies you won't discipline. Michelle looked around and saw it was Mrs. Chen, mother of a 5th grader who'd apparently also been victimized by Brad's group. My daughter has been afraid to go to school because of Brad Henley and his friends, Mrs. Chen continued. These bikers are the first thing that's made her feel safe in months. Other parents began speaking up, sharing stories of their children being bullied while the school looked the other way. The crowd's sympathy was clearly with the bikers, not with Robert Henley or the school administration. Officer Martinez turned to Principal Crawford. Sounds like you've got a bullying problem that needs addressing. We handle discipline issues internally. Apparently not very well. Frank stepped forward. Officer Martinez, all we want is for kids to be safe at school. We're not here to cause trouble. I know that, Frank. And I know these parents wouldn't have called you if they had any other choice. Robert Henley realized he was losing control of the narrative. This is ridiculous. I'm calling the superintendent." "Good idea," Officer Martinez said. "Maybe he can explain why your son hasn't faced any consequences for assaulting other students." As Robert stormed away with his security guards, the crowd began to disperse, but the damage to his reputation was done. Parents who'd been afraid to speak up about the Henley family's influence had heard Frank and the other bikers talk about their real lives and real jobs. They'd also seen Robert's true character when he was confronted with evidence of his son's behavior. Principal Crawford slipped away without addressing any of the parents' concerns, but Michelle knew this wasn't over. What she didn't know was that the confrontation had been witnessed by someone who would soon change everything. Dr. Patricia Williams, the district superintendent, had been driving past the school when she saw the crowd gathering. She'd parked and listened to the entire confrontation from the edge of the group. As a former teacher and principal herself, Dr. Williams understood exactly what was happening. A bullying problem had been allowed to fester because of one family's influence, and parents had been forced to seek outside help to protect their children. Monday morning, Dr. Williams called an emergency meeting with Principal Crawford, the school board, and representatives from both families. "I witnessed Friday's incident," she began, "and I've spent the weekend reviewing our bullying policies and their implementation at Riverside Elementary." Principal Crawford looked nervous. "The situation has been blown out of proportion." "Has it?" "Because what I saw was a group of parents so desperate to protect their children that they enlisted community volunteers to provide safety the school should have been providing." Robert Henley leaned forward. "Those weren't community volunteers, they were motorcycle gang members." "Mr. Henley, I did some research this weekend. Frank Russo is a decorated veteran who runs a non-profit organization that mentors at-risk youth. Tommy Castellano teaches at Jefferson Elementary and coaches youth sports. Marcus Webb owns a construction company that's donated materials for 3 school playgrounds. But they're bikers. They're citizens who stepped up to protect children when our institutions failed to do so." Dr. Williams turned to Principal Crawford. "I've also reviewed the incident reports filed regarding bullying at your school this year. There are dozens of complaints, mostly involving the same group of students, and virtually no documented disciplinary actions. We handle these matters carefully." "You don't handle them at all. You dismiss them, ignore them, or blame the victims." She opened a thick folder. "Mrs. Torres, I owe you an apology. Your concerns should have been taken seriously from the beginning." "Thank you. Mr. Henley, your son and his friends are being suspended pending a full investigation. If the allegations are substantiated, expulsion is possible." Robert's face turned red. "You can't do this. I've supported this district for years. Your financial contributions don't give your son license to assault other students. This is revenge for Friday's incident. This is accountability that should have happened months ago." Dr. Williams stood up. "Effective immediately, Mr. Crawford. You're being placed on administrative leave pending a review of your handling of bullying incidents. The district will be implementing new policies to ensure that all students feel safe at school." Crawford started to protest, but Dr. Williams cut him off. "The fact that parents felt they had to call bikers to protect their children is an indictment of our failure as educators. That changes today." 6 months later, Riverside Elementary had a new principal and a comprehensive anti-bullying program that actually worked. Brad Henley and his friends had been transferred to other schools, where they faced real consequences for aggressive behavior. Danny Torres was thriving academically and socially. The fear that had controlled his life was gone, replaced by confidence and genuine friendships. Frank and his motorcycle club had become unofficial school safety advocates, working with the district to develop programs that helped students understand the difference between intimidation and protection. Michelle often saw Frank at school events, where he was treated with the respect due to someone who'd stood up for children when adults had failed them. One evening, as she was picking Danny up from baseball practice, Michelle found Frank in the stands watching his own daughter play softball on the adjacent field. "Thank you," she said, sitting down beside him. "Not just for that day, but for showing Danny what real strength looks like." Frank smiled. Real strength is standing up for people who can't protect themselves. You did that when you called me. I was desperate. You were brave, and you taught your son that when the system fails, sometimes you have to look for help in unexpected places. Michelle watched Danny laughing with his teammates, completely free of the fear that had consumed him months earlier. "You know what the funny thing is?" she said. "What's that?" "Everyone was afraid of the bikers, but the real threats were wearing suits and carrying briefcases." Frank nodded. "Happens more often than people think. Some of the scariest-looking people have the biggest hearts, and some of the most respectable-looking people have the smallest." As Danny ran over to tell Michelle about his perfect game, she reflected on the lesson her son had learned. That courage could come from unexpected sources, that real protection meant standing up for others, and that the most important thing about a person wasn't how they looked, but whether they showed up when children needed help. The bikers had taught her son that true strength wasn't about intimidating others. It was about using whatever power you had to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. And in a world where bullies often wore the mask of respectability, that was the most valuable lesson of all.
Liked hearing this one? Hit that like button and subscribe to Hammer and Tales for more. Check out the next story on your screen. It's a good one. See you next time.